Hey everybody, it's Kevin Carr, and we're back for another episode of The Movement. Today, it's episode number 13, and we're going to talk a little bit about kettlebell swings and why they're an awesome move to develop explosive rotational power. So today, we're going to talk about kettlebell swings. Kettlebell swings are one of my favorite exercises, and they're something that I program very frequently both for my clients and for myself personally. What I really like about kettlebell swings is their versatility. They're really easy to teach, and they're a low risk, high reward, heavy implement power exercise that I can program for most of my clients. As some of you might know, we often program hang cleans to develop lower body power for our athletes at MBSC. And while the hang clean is an awesome exercise, it can often be contraindicated for baseball players, tennis players, and golfers who rely heavily on their shoulder, elbow, and wrist strength to compete. So sometimes choosing an alternative power option, like the kettlebell swing, can be a great way to develop lower body power without placing undue stress on that segment of the body. I also find the kettlebell swing does a great job of developing the power and hip sequencing needed for these high velocity, power-based rotational sports. So you might be thinking to yourself, the kettlebell swing looks nothing like those rotational movements. How's that going to translate to my sport? Well, let me tell you. All right, so I got my pelvis here, so I can give you kind of a close-up example of what's happening at the pelvis and at the hips when we're doing these high-power rotational movements. So what we often see on the outside is a lot of frontal plane and transverse plane movement when we're swinging through a baseball, swinging a tennis racket, or swinging a golf club. But what's actually going on in the pelvis that a lot of people don't notice is a lot of sagittal plane motion, so flexion, extension of the pelvis on a fixed femur. So let me show you here. What often happens when we're addressing a golf ball or we're sitting in the batting box, okay, is we're in a position of relative anterior pelvic tilt, meaning the pelvis is flexed forward, okay? As we go through the motion, what we're gonna see great athletes do is they're gonna relatively posteriorly tilt their pelvis, so that way they can create tension in their abdomen and translate that force from the ground, from their lower body, up through their torso, into their hands, into whatever implement they're trying to hit. That's how we create force transmission in a rotational movement, right? And the reason I bring this up when I'm talking about kettlebell swings is that's the exact motion that happens when we're finishing a kettlebell swing. So let's take a little bit of a closer look and some video breakdown of what happens with some of these rotational movements as well as what happens in a swing so we connect the dots a little bit better.
All right, so let's break down this home run swing here and really talk about what's going on at the pelvis and at the hips before and during contact. And we can see here, even when we're paused, if we use his belt as a guide to looking at the position of the pelvis, you can see here that he's in a position of relative anterior tilt, right? Because you see that this belt is slanted downwards. It's lower in the front than it is in the back. And that's a pretty normal position that you're going to see a batter in the batter's box or a golfer approaching a golf ball. They're going to be relatively anteriorly tilted, and using the belt as a guide is a really good way to show us. So we're going to see him swing through the pitch, okay? See him hit the home run, and then let's look at this in slow-mo as he comes across here. Again, relative anterior tilt. You see across here, if we pause, again, anteriorly tilted, but as he starts to come to make contact with the ball, what we're going to see is his pelvis level out. He's going to go in a position of relative posterior tilt. So he can connect the power here from his lower body generated in his hips that he's starting to generate in the frontal and transverse plane into the sagittal plane to put force into the ball. So as we watch here, as he comes in slow-mo across, watch how his pelvis levels out. And right about here, as he's about making contact with the ball, we see he's just about almost completely leveled his pelvis. You see he's relatively posteriorly tilted when we look at the position of his pelvis relative to his lumbar spine. Again, we're going to keep coming across, pretty much leveled out his pelvis here in order to transfer that force from his lower body to his upper body. Okay, so what we want to see here is that he's able to tuck his pelvis under, use his hips, use his glutes, and counter that effort by using his obliques to create stiffness through his core to transfer that power from his lower body into his upper body and to effectively strike the baseball. And you're going to see when we go to the golf swing next, the very similar motion that occurs when we're swinging a golf club to hit a golf ball as well. All right, next let's look at Tiger Woods swinging a golf club here. And we're going to see the same type of motions going on at the pelvis for him to produce power and transfer power from his lower body through his upper body into that golf ball. So similar to the home run swing we saw earlier, you can see here he's relatively anteriorly tilted. His pelvis is relatively flexed on his femur here. So we see this line. You can't really see his belt, but you can see his hip line with his shirt if you follow the cursor here, right? And watch, we're going to watch this at normal speed first as him kind of swing through, right? And now if we look in slow-mo as he comes backwards, okay, I'll try to slow this down a little. Here, still relatively anteriorly tilted, right? But watch as he comes down, how his pelvis is going to level. And you can see his pelvis starts to tilt under and face upwards so he can create tension, transferring that force from his hips, countering that with his obliques, and leveling so he can produce power and push into the ball. Okay, again, we're seeing that pelvis go in all of these rotational movements from a position of anterior tilt underneath to a position of relative posterior tilt, so you can create stiffness and transfer that force from the lower body into the upper body and into the hands. All right, so let's break down this video of me doing a kettlebell swing here. We're going to see the same pelvic mechanics going on in the swing as we saw in the baseball swing, as well as the golf swing. Same thing going on at kettlebell swing. So you can see here, again, I'm in a position of relative pelvic flexion, right? My pelvis is flexed on my femur, okay, as I start. As we go into the swing, you can see I'm still flexed. As we come up to the top, though, you see my pelvis relatively posteriorly tilts, tucking underneath. Again, forcefully, relatively extending the hip, relatively extending the femur, counteracting that force with the strength of the obliques to create stiffness and transfer that force from the lower body to the upper body. Okay, as you can see again, pelvic flexion, relative to pelvic tilt. Okay, tucking that pelvis underneath, extending the hips. Okay, and tucking that pelvis under. Okay, what's happening here, as you can see, is same exact thing. As we're starting that kettlebell swing, as we're at the bottom position, we're on the left side here, we're in a position of relative anterior tilt. As we progress, as we get to the top of the swing, we go into a position of relative posterior tilt, tucking the pelvis under, using the glutes, using your anterior core musculature, your obliques, and your rectus abdominis to relatively posterior tilt the pelvis and create stiffness so you can transfer that force from the lower body into the upper.
All right, so I hope that breakdown was helpful for you to understand why kettlebell swings are such a valuable tool for developing explosive rotational power in sports like baseball, tennis, and golf. If you guys have any questions or comments, please drop below in the comment section. If you have any requests of something you'd like to see us cover in the future, please let us know. Thank you all for watching. My name is Kevin Carr, and I'll see you next time on The Movement.